there's a lot of societal pressure.
You've just done something amazing. Procreated.
Can you imagine telling your spouse or your mother-in-law, I'm thinking of killing the baby? My toddler, who's 2 years old, eats more calories than some women do these days.
Hey guys, and welcome back to It's Pretty Simple. I'm Nikita Kohli, and this week I have a very special guest. We have Hannah Jafar with us. Hey Hannah, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So Hannah, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
So first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited, and I actually went back and listened to a couple of other episodes that you recently uploaded on YouTube, and I think that you talk about some really awesome topics. So if this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, go back and listen to all the other topics, especially if you're not pregnant or postpartum anytime soon. There's a lot that you can benefit from it. So we're going to be talking about what I just mentioned today because I'm a certified personal trainer, but specifically also a certified pre- and postnatal trainer. I'm a mom of 2, and I'm also a psychiatry resident at the University of Toronto. So I do train all types of people, but I have a focus on pre- and postnatal training just because there's like limited coaches that are certified in this field in Kuwait. And so few coaches to satisfy a large demand, essentially.
That's true, but wow, you were juggling a lot of things. You're like super mom, right? That's really
Yes.
cool.
Not easy, but
I'm sure. But I think it makes a lot of sense that, you've kind of gone into that niche. Like for me, for example, I'm certified pre and postnatal, but I find it quite difficult to actually properly implement, especially given the fact that I've never been pregnant. I don't have a baby. And I feel like there's so many things out there about like what people should do, what they shouldn't do. And I also, from my understanding, all the certifications as well actually say different things. They're saying, oh, that's not right. This is right. So every certification says different things. So I feel like when you've actually had the experience, had a baby, and what has changed within you, although, women are all different, obviously, I think that makes it much easier. So it's a really good niche to go into for sure.
Yeah. And I think you'd agree, like, you know how we have our certifications in personal training, like whether it's ACE or NESM or whatever, like you can have that certification, but unless you've been training for years, you will not have experience. And I don't even mean just training people, because training other people is important, but you yourself will learn things about like programming and like mind muscle connection and which workouts, which, for example, exercises work specific muscles in the best way and all those types of things. Like you can read about it, but until you implement it, it's really difficult for you to have that experience. And so I was training people before I became a mom that were also pregnant and postpartum, but I would say that until I actually experienced it myself, that's when I had like that full scope picture of like what it is that people go through. And so it's been like an interesting journey, to say the least.
Definitely. I mean, like for me, I've been coaching for like over 13 years now. And when I did do my pre and postnatal certification, I was doing a few prenatal prior, just because I had so much experience with coaching people, But once you shift online to then coach people who are pregnant, it's a little bit hard to actually do it properly, whereas face-to-face it's completely different.
Yeah. And then the other issue is that a lot of people who have young children or who have just given birth cannot make the time to do in-person personal training. And so that's the reason why they want an online program, because they don't have time to go to the gym, or they don't have time to like guarantee that they won't cancel an hour in advance. And so having that flexibility with the online training is what most people in this population want. So it's a fine line between like training people in person and training online, but also because I work with, I'm sure you know Hana, the physiotherapist who used to be at DISC. So I work closely with her, and she's a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And I tend to refer a lot of my clients to her to meet with her. And then she does an assessment for them. And then once she's assessed them, internal examination as well with the pelvic floor and all that, that's when I start to train them postpartum. And it's helpful for me because, like you said, like I can't see them in person. I don't know what their pelvic floor strength is like. And even if you were to see someone in person, you wouldn't really know that because you wouldn't do an internal exam in a gym setting, And so it's helpful to have different scopes of practice, because it is so important to make sure that you're staying safe and people aren't doing anything that could compromise their strength and making things worse for their recovery as well.
Yeah, that's true. I know we wanted to, go into postpartum mainly, but before we jump into that, I wanted to talk a little bit about pregnancy as well. Just kind of to eliminate all the weird myths around it, because there's a lot of debate around exercising during pregnancy. You have doctors who tell a lot of pregnant women they should not train at all, whereas their trainers are telling them they should train. And then you have more holistic doctors who will tell them they should train. And as far as I know, if you've already been super active from before, then you should be training all throughout your pregnancy if there's no complications, right? So what are your thoughts on this mindset?
So first and foremost, doctors only know what guidelines say. Guidelines are based on meta-analysis studies that they do research on large amounts of people, see what the outcomes are, and then that's what sets guidelines. Doctors who have graduated 30 years ago are going to have learned different guidelines than doctors that graduate a year ago, because obviously guidelines change as research changes and people learn more and more about this topic. So the most recent guidelines say that unless there is a contraindication or any reason why someone should not be training while pregnant, it is more beneficial for you and your child to train during pregnancy than not. So moms who think that they're being safe by not working out while pregnant, they're actually doing a disservice to themselves and to their child by not training during that pregnancy. So my first line of advice whenever I have somebody who texts me that's like 5 or 6 weeks pregnant is find a doctor that's in line with your goals. If working out is important to you, then going to a doctor who's not an advocate for exercise is obviously not going to be productive for you. If that's something that you don't really care about, then sure, go ahead. But I do have a list of obstetricians that I suggest to people that are pro-exercise. And if they tell you not to exercise, then you know that you really shouldn't be for a specific reason. But otherwise, they will give you the green light to go ahead and exercise because, like I said, they're more up to date with the recent guidelines. And so I feel like there's a lot of also societal pressure, like people's parents telling them not to exercise or grandparents or in-laws or whatever. So you have to have that confidence in telling people, like, I have the green light from my doctor, because it's going to be really difficult for your doctor to tell you not to work out, even if you know that you can be, but then still go against that advice, especially as a first-time mom. So number one, finding a doctor that's pro-exercise and that's going to actually support you during this journey, so that if you ever get that unsolicited advice from anyone, you can automatically just say, my doctor cleared me to exercise and I know what I'm doing. I'm working with a certified postnatal coach. And then that will kind of help you feel supported and feel confident. And then once you have like your second and third pregnancy, like people will stop commenting. My first pregnancy, I got so many concerned DMs from people being like, worried about your baby. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm more worried about my baby than you are, but thank you for that message. By the second time, no one cared about it anymore. I feel like they're just used to seeing that. But at the same time, like obviously some doctors also are kind of the go ahead and do every single thing that you were doing pre-pregnancy. So that's also not the case. You have to find the middle ground where you're doing things that are safe and at the same time staying active.
Yeah. What about moms who are having a baby for the first time and they themselves have never moved at all, zero exercise in their entire life, and they suddenly decide, I'm pregnant now. I want to make sure that I don't gain too much weight and I have some control over this and I'm going to jump straight into training.
Yeah, and it happens a lot, especially because the recommended weight gain is much less flexible when someone is overweight or obese to start with. So patients who are pregnant, who are overweight or obese, have very little leeway in how much weight they should optimally gain. Whereas if you're a normal BMI, you have like a larger range and more leeway to gain fat. So a lot of times people are overweight or obese to begin with. They get pregnant and then their doctor's like, listen, you can't gain more than like 7 kg. And so in that case, you have to really be, honed in with your nutrition and also with starting to incorporate some movement. But I would say for those people, you definitely have to have the guidance of a prenatal certified coach, because just going to classes and modifying for yourself, for example, is not going to work. So I always recommend that it's never like you cannot you can work out for the first time or for the first time in a long time while pregnant, but you really need to be doing it gradually to making sure that you're not getting injured, because your likelihood of getting injured while pregnant is higher than while not pregnant. And of course, for any beginner who doesn't know what they're doing at the gym, the likelihood of injury is high in the beginning of their workout journey.
Yeah, and this way, it's you have a baby in your belly, so I think having a face-to-face trainer in that sense, if you're brand new, would be probably the best way to go.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I want to jump into the challenges of postpartum recovery. First, I want to know your experiences. Like, what was some of your biggest physical challenges during your postpartum recovery?
So a lot of things that people don't realize are that, first of all, you will feel stronger while pregnant than postpartum. So like even in my last days of pregnancy, I was able to deadlift, bench press, whatever, stronger and heavier weights than I was postpartum. So people are actually very shocked to find that, because you think, okay, if I'm 9 months pregnant, then obviously when the baby's out, I'm going to be like super ready to go and like be lifting back to my pre-pregnancy numbers. And that's not the case at all, because what happens is that when you're pregnant, your linea alba stretches. This happens to every single pregnant woman by week 37, so it's normal. But that decreases your core strength to a very significant amount. So unless you're doing isolation exercises, any compound lifts, anything that requires your core, you're going to feel immediately extremely weak doing that. Second thing is you're going to be likely suffering from lack of sleep. You might have lost blood while in delivery. So there are so many factors that go into play with this. So in postpartum, what I was most shocked to find out was that I was a lot weaker than before. And I always describe it as like I felt like my upper body and my lower body were for someone who's an advanced athlete, but then my core was like a complete beginner. Your core feels mushy, it feels weak, it feels like you can't do anything. Like even just, I was training someone the other day who's very, very fit and athletic and was training throughout her whole pregnancy. But even just standing and lifting up one knee at a time was a challenge for her, because the balance is so impacted because the core is so weak. And so that's something that you have to anticipate going into postpartum, is it's going to take a long time for you to regain your strength. And it's something that's totally normal, but it's just kind of having to cope with that realization that like, okay, this is actually not going to be a 1 month bounce back type of thing. It's going to take me like maybe even up to a year or two to feel like myself again.
That's super interesting. Yeah, see, this is why I wanted to speak to you about this, because you've had a baby, and you've actually you've looked at what you've learned, and you're seeing what's happening to you and your body and what you need to work towards. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't even imagine like feeling that way, like your whole core is just mush. Yeah,
it's
maybe one day.
It looks mushy, it feels mushy, and it just like you can really sense like performance being impacted by this, because obviously like if you're going to go back to doing things that require a lot of core, like push-ups and that type of thing, like how are you going to do that if your core is so weak? Even if your chest is strong, your arms are strong, your shoulders are strong, you still need to have core strength for most movements. And so you can do like a tricep pull down like you did pre-pregnancy, but you won't be able to do like a pull-up like pre-pregnancy. So there's definitely a difference in what type of exercises you should be doing. And that's why like postpartum training is so specific, because it's just like dealing with an injury, but in a different way. It's just your whole core is injured rather than like a nagging shoulder pain or knee pain.
Yeah. And so how would you recommend people bounce back postpartum then?
So that's something that I actually wanted to address, because this is something that I see a lot, which is that people in Kuwait, and I'm sure this is all over the world, not just in Kuwait, but because I train mostly people here, this is what I see. They're so cautious about training while pregnant, even to the point of doing nothing. But then as soon as they deliver the baby, they want to like go back to being like in boot camp and like running and everything. And so it's like, you need to understand that when you're pregnant, what you need to make sure you're doing and not doing, and the things that you're actually being cautious about, are not to protect the baby. The baby's protected, unless you're doing kickboxing or like riding a horse, your baby is not going to get injured by you doing a standing press. You know what I mean? The things that you need to focus on in prenatal training are to protect yourself from damaging your core, from damaging your pelvic floor specifically. When the baby is out, there's still that risk. If you go back to lifting weights in a very extreme way without properly recovering, or go back to running without properly recovering, you can damage your body to a permanent extent. And so what I see is that people are like doing nothing while pregnant, and then as soon as the baby's out, they want to lose the baby weight, and they're like, I'm going to go back to like running, I'm going to go back to doing burpees, I'm going to go, and it's like, you can't do that. Just because the baby's out, you need to still protect yourself. It's not like, you can just go back to doing whatever. And so people need to realize that postpartum training has to also be very cautious and very slow. And I have people that message me and they're like, hi, I'm 5 days postpartum. When can I start? And I'm like, start what? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, how are you even how are you even sleeping right now? Like, start what? You know what I mean? And then when you ask them, they're like, I haven't trained in 3 years. I'm like, but did you really think that this is the right time right now for you to like go back to the gym? Like, you know what I mean? So it's all about obviously balance. And not doing what you see on Instagram, because every person's journey is different. And so I always include disclaimers as well, that like, just because you see me doing something specific, my birth experience may have been very different from other people. My birth experience from pregnancy to pregnancy was very different. With my daughter, I had more stitches, so I had to wait longer. With my son, I didn't. So it's all about like what you've went through specifically. So you can't compare yourself to other people and be like, I saw this Instagram person doing it, so I'm going to do the same thing as well. So the first thing that I always recommend is, number one, resting and recovering, obviously focusing on what's important, which is you recovering from a very, traumatizing experience, which is birth, whether it be by C-section or vaginal delivery, bonding with your baby, because this is a really important time for bonding as well. And then once you've kind of come out of that bubble, then you can start to think about doing physiotherapy to recover. Seeing a pelvic floor physiotherapist. They usually see you at around 4 to 6 weeks, just to check everything to make sure it's okay. And then even when you've been cleared to exercise, you need to take it very gradually and slow, because there are people who are cleared and then they go into things way too fast, and then they start to notice pelvic floor symptoms, or they start to notice coning. So just because you've been cleared doesn't mean that you can just like go and take on the world. You still need to actually make sure that you're doing things in a gradual way, because you can be cleared and then develop symptoms afterwards. So you want to make sure that you're not falling into that trap as well.
Yeah, I think this also it's a very psychological thing, because I think after they give birth, one, they don't realize that they've gone through trauma, because they don't associate trauma with giving birth, not realizing that there is, you've gone through a very, very big thing. Your body is, it's changed. It was something else. Even like being pregnant, your body is like getting inflammation. There's so much happening. And so that's trauma happening within your body. Once you give birth, you go through the surgery, whether it's C-section, you're still going to have trauma. And I think people don't realize that. And they don't realize also how much their cortisol is probably elevated during this entire process as well. And then they look at themselves in the mirror and they're just like, oh my God, I need to do something about this. And then also not realizing that, since everybody's body's different, because their friend went back into training and, she's gone back to her pre-baby exact same body, doesn't mean you're going to, because maybe, your hormonal balance has changed a little bit that maybe didn't happen to her. And now maybe you are gaining fat in other places that you never did before. And I think all these things come into play, and people just don't realize that. They think that they can just switch one thing to another and just go back to their old baby weight. About that, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, a lot of the times people don't go back to their pre-baby body. And I think there's this obsession with it, because I always see this stuff on Instagram, people saying going back to baby body, and it's like, you can't have that expectation, right?
Yeah.
Because you've gone through so much. What are your thoughts on that?
So I definitely think that you won't ever go back to your pre-baby body. That's not to say that you won't look fit, or you won't look lean, or you won't look good. But there are changes that obviously happen. And obviously somebody who has carried and birthed a child will have some differences in their body, whether they be internal or external, compared to someone who didn't. And I think that that's something that you have to accept. Just like you accept that your life will not be the same, your routine will not be the same. What makes you think that your body is going to look exactly the same? And I feel like the sooner that we accept that, the more likely we're going to we're going to have a positive experience with our body image postpartum. And like you mentioned, like about the hormones, people who have hormone imbalances already struggle to lose weight as is, let alone when you have the hormone imbalances of a postpartum and breastfeeding mother. That's like the ultimate hormone imbalance. So how do you expect that everything is going to just go back to normal so quickly, And I always tell people this, and I've even posted about it so many times. When I deliver, I actually weigh less than I do 1 month or 2 months postpartum, because breastfeeding makes you retain fat. And it makes you retain fat in places that you genetically do not normally retain fat. For example, I'm not somebody who retains fat in my hips and my lower belly genetically, like pre-motherhood. But when I've been breastfeeding, that's where I retain fat. So it's like the hormones literally change everything about you. And instead of trying to fight that and, go to the gym 7 times a week and be spending all your time there and trying to go on a restrictive diet, which I also see a lot of people do with their nutrition, the sooner that you embrace those changes and you realize that this is going to take time, the happier you're going to be overall. And I really do think that we already have enough stress as is, and that's why people go through things like postpartum depression. So just accepting the fact that this is going to take time and this is not going to be something that happens overnight, and not to compare yourself, is obviously going to be easier for you. That's not saying to let yourself go and just forget about it completely. It's to continue, eating healthy and focusing on taking care of yourself, but also acknowledging that this isn't going to be something that's going to happen overnight.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like this is a big problem, and I don't think people realize that, you've literally just brought another human being onto this planet. Like, there is something big that's just happened. You cannot get so obsessed with trying to go back to something else. This is you've just done something amazing. Procreated. You've got human being. Yeah, I don't know. I also think there's a lot to do with the society. Like a lot of my clients are in Kuwait, and I've also come to realize that they're really worried about what other people are gonna say about them. Like in terms of, because people tend to just comment on people's bodies, and I think it's not going away from that culture. I mean, in Kuwait, yes, and also I'm Indian. Even in the Indian culture, it's the same thing. Like the first thing people comment is something about your body, like whether you've given birth or not. And I think more than anything, this is what plays on people's minds. Oh, my friend is going to talk to my other friend and say, oh my God, did you see how much weight she gained after birth? So, things like that. And I think that is a big problem in the society because of the culture.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard to ignore those comments, of course. And already, like, hormones are through the roof. You're overly emotional as is. You're probably feeling self-conscious about the way you look because there are so many changes that have happened, but it's important to focus on what's important. And I say that even as somebody who's in the fitness industry, who has my body constantly judged by thousands of people on a daily basis, not even just like family, like literally everyone. But at the end of the day, you just need to focus on yourself. And that goes to say, whether, like you said, whether you've given birth or not, you shouldn't be focusing on other people, because your journey is your own journey.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, what we do does put us in the eyes of people, and I'm sure, people comment. I don't get any messages, but I'm pretty sure they do, because I mean, I don't have kids, I train, but I enjoy my food and my lifestyle, and I'm not walking around with a 6-pack, and I post all the time, so it makes you wonder how many people scroll at my pictures and say, oh, she's got a belly, she's not very fit, you know what I mean? But my fitness level is insane, I don't need to have a 6-pack for that.
I was just saying, it's hard not to, like, whenever I post a video of myself doing, like, for example, postpartum training, and I see all the number of shares the video has gotten, I'm starting to think, like, what are they talking about when they share my video? You know what I mean? So you never know. Yeah. And it is hard as a human being to, come to that realization. But like you said, you have your own life, and you acknowledge the fact that you want to enjoy your food and kind of have more of a relaxed lifestyle. And if people want to judge that, then it's their problem.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make me less good at what I do, Yeah. If you have a specific goal, you get your goal. If, like, when I have my specific goals, my body's obviously going to change as well. But the good thing is, in Europe, actually, I don't know if it's good. You can't see the shares on your stories.
Oh, okay.
So I never know. It's like it's something with the law, some privacy law. So yeah, I never know the numbers, but it would be interesting to see on that point, actually.
Yeah, maybe to protect mental health, because then you start to think about, like, why are they sharing my posts,
Probably, yeah. I want to now come into rebuilding strength after birth. So, like you said earlier, you after birth, people don't realize how your pelvic floor could get damaged, how weak your core becomes. What is the best way from your own personal experience, along with the people that you've trained, for new moms to start rebuilding their strength? I mean, first point, get yourself a certified trainer, but then after that, or
Yeah.
if they can't afford to do that, what should they do on their own?
So the first thing is obviously to have a realistic baseline. So what was your pre-pregnancy strength like? And what were you doing while you were pregnant? So you have to be honest about yourself when it comes to regaining strength. Because even if I were to tell you, like, you have a new client, Nikita, this person hasn't worked out in 9 months, removing pregnancy aside, you're obviously not going to expect that their strength is going to be all that, you know?
Yeah.
Versus if I told you somebody took 3 or 4 weeks off, which is, for
Yeah.
example, if someone has been training throughout their whole pregnancy. So the speed in which someone will regain their strength has a large role to play in how active they were during pregnancy and also before pregnancy. Number one thing for everyone is to work on strengthening their deep core, reconnecting with their core, because like I said earlier, it's extremely mushy and you're not able to engage it like you used to. So just reconnecting with your deep core, reconnecting with your pelvic floor muscles. Make sure you're strengthening those muscles in and out of the gym, because a lot of the pelvic floor work comes out of the gym. It's very difficult to focus on pelvic floor when you're working out. And then once you've
Mhm.
had that baseline established and you have a solid base with those two things, you can start to work on progressive overload with weights and that type of thing. So I would say always, you know, strength training helps with recovery. It's very important. I tend to I avoid high impact exercises. I have to be honest. Like, I will not program jumping for anyone. I will not program running for anyone, because those things will deter your recovery. Whereas strength training, resistance training, low impact resistance training will help with your recovery. So that will help, just doing those types of things for a few months at least before you go back into a boot camp style class, if that's what you used to do before. Like, a lot of people are doing the unit one type of classes. So those types
Mhm.
of things where, like, it's very difficult for you to be focusing on the mind muscle connection and your breathing and your pelvic floor and your core engagement, because it's like moving so quickly. You can't be doing that right after you've given birth. You have to establish like a good base with yourself, whether it be with a personal trainer or training on your own. And then once you feel like you kind of regain some of that strength, then you can go into some of those more fast paced, high intensity classes.
Also, after giving birth, when you are breastfeeding, you're still producing relaxin, right? Which is the
Mm-hmm.
hormone which makes you more flexible, so you're more prone to injury. Does that
Yep,
happen during breastfeeding as well, or is it just
it does.
just
So
at the
your
end of the pregnancy?
so your joints need time to recover as well. Your joints will be more lax than they were pre-pregnancy, even after the baby is out. The other thing is that breastfeeding makes it very difficult to build muscle because of the high levels of estrogen. So you can see that even if you're eating a super high protein diet, you're training 5 or 6 times a week, you're still not able to build muscle. The other thing is that it increases your appetite substantially because of the hormonal changes as well. And it's not you're not going to be craving like a chicken breast, you know what I mean? You're going to be craving like carbs basically. And so that also
Right.
kind of deters your progress in building strength and having, optimal performance. So there's like so many factors that come into play. Your sleep again is not going to be the best for at least a year, sometimes more than that. And so obviously if you're not sleeping, you're
Depends
not
on the
going to be
child.
like, how are you going to be, hitting PRs when you sleep for like 3 or 4 hour stretches at most, if you're
Yeah.
lucky? Otherwise, it's like 2 hour stretches. You're not going to be deadlifting like 150
Yeah.
kg at that point. You know what I mean?
They need to be more realistic about their goals then, and realize that, like you said, it's a whole lifestyle change. Your entire routine is changed, so people need to be a bit more realistic. Like you just said, I wanted to just come into the nutrition a little bit because you pointed it out. So estrogen increases, so it's harder to build muscle. A lot of women after they give birth, they want to just like slash down the calories, which is obviously wrong because you're still breastfeeding. You need more calories than you normally would. What is the best way to navigate it? without going into having glucose spikes, binge eating, and without also cutting down your calories like crazy.
Yeah. So I'm totally against women going on restrictive diets postpartum, whether they're breastfeeding or not, but especially if they're breastfeeding. Everyone's different in that aspect. Like, for example, I'm the type of person that if I go even on a mild calorie deficit, my milk supply drops. Some of my
Mm-hmm.
clients can actually maintain a 200 to 300 calorie deficit and still maintain their milk supply. So everyone's different from that regard. But I, even in that case, would not recommend anyone to go less than 200 to 300 calories maximum as a deficit. The only thing that you can really do is try and eat healthy as best as you can, but also recognizing that these cravings are there for a reason. You know, it's not like
Mm-hmm.
emotional eating in that sense. Like your body is craving this food because it needs energy to produce breast milk, which is the equivalent of running sometimes 10 kilometers. So you burn around 500 to 600 calories or more on a daily basis. So if you're running and burning 600 calories per day, you're obviously going to fuel your body, but then people for some reason are like, I'm not going to eat enough. I want to be on a calorie deficit now. And it's like, how are you going to maintain your milk supply in that case? You know? So the other thing that I always tell people is that the appetite increase is temporary. It's usually only for the first 3 to 4 months. Then after that, once the baby grows older, your appetite will not be as high as it used to be. So I'm already 5 months postpartum now. My appetite's back to normal. And so a lot of women struggle to lose weight breastfeeding in the beginning, but then actually later in their breastfeeding journey, they lose weight faster than women who are not breastfeeding because they're burning those extra calories, but their appetite is now at baseline. So also
Mm.
recognizing that that's temporary and slashing calories is not the way to go. And I think that this is something that you've talked about with your other guests in the past that like, and even on your own page, I've seen it multiple times. Like my toddler who's 2 years old eats more calories than some women do these days. She eats
Yeah.
around 1,300 to 400 calories, but then there are like grown women who are breastfeeding who want less than that. So that's just to put
Yeah.
it into perspective for you.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, I most of the time, whenever I have any clients who are postpartum and still breastfeeding, what I normally do is I get their maintenance calories, and I don't really give them a deficit until like they're a little bit in a later stage of their breastfeeding. And I tell them our focus, like with your nutrition now, you can do your cravings, but try to stay within this range with your macros and everything, and focus on eating whole foods. But I'm not going to cut your calories down. I'm actually giving you maintenance because your normal maintenance would be a deficit already, right? So that
Yeah.
they're still able to produce milk. And
Mm-hmm.
then I tell them, let's focus on slowly getting back into training and getting movement into your life. And then once you go past the breastfeeding stage, then we can kind of take the calories down more, incorporate more variation with your training and things like that. But they
Yeah.
just want it so quick, like, oh, this is so much food. And I'm like, you're feeding two people,
Yeah.
you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That what you're doing is exactly right. And as someone who's a nutritionist, I'm sure that you know that when you cut calories in your main meals, you're gonna be craving things at night. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
That's when
definitely.
you're gonna start to snack. So if you're already going to snack, don't cut calories from your main meals because that's going to make the snacking even worse. So you might as well
Mm-hmm.
focus on eating a well balanced, high protein diet, getting enough calories in your main meals to try and limit the snacking as much as possible. Whereas if you're going to be like, I'm skipping breakfast, my lunch is going to be a salad, my dinner is going to be, Greek yogurt, at night, you're just going to end up derailing all your progress anyway. So it's also about kind of giving people that education and realizing that they need to be eating and fueling their bodies. And they're also, again, like you said earlier, recovering from a surgery sometimes, like, why are you not eating enough food? Your body needs calories to also recover. If you have stitches, if
Mm-hmm.
you have blood loss, so there are all these things that people need to be focusing on that's not appearance related, that's going on the inside.
It's because they can't feel it. They can't feel the pain. I mean, for example, I mean, I did give birth, but I had done my nose, and I jumped back into things pretty quick. My recovery was pretty quick, but I was feeling really tired, and I had gone into a fat loss phase right after because I had taken like 8 weeks off. So I said I'm gonna do a cut as I get back into training, and I was so fatigued constantly. And then I realized like I may not feel pain, but I'm still probably very inflamed from the inside. I've just gone through like full on trauma. My body's trying to heal itself, and I'm trying to push myself to like the max when it comes to the gym, because I took 8 weeks off, and it was like, okay, no, I need to slow down, and I need to realize, that just because I can't feel it doesn't mean that there's not stuff happening inside right now.
Yeah.
And it really made me realize that, I need to take these things into consideration when I do things for myself, as well as with clients. Like, it didn't really click until I experienced it myself, and I felt burnt out all the time,
Yeah.
and it was just because I was healing, and I didn't realize. Yeah,
Exactly. And that's a very good point. And just to put that into perspective, doing your nose is like one small part of your face, let alone when all of your organs have been pushed to a different place in your body. You have a dinner-sized plate wound inside your body. You're bleeding from the bottom. You have stitches and potentially a cut through 7 layers of your abdomen. And you think that you can jump back into the gym right after,
When you describe it like that, it sounds scary. I don't think I want to have any babies. I don't think I want to have babies.
But also,
it's worth it. You forget it.
A lot of elite athletes choose not to have children for that reason, and it's, I mean, again, if that's your decision, if you feel like you recognize that this is going to derail your training progress to a very extreme level, if you're somebody who competes like on an international level, for example, then fair enough, having children will actually like impact your progress quite a bit. So it's all about, also prioritizing what's important to you.
I mean, I'm not an international athlete, but just the thought of childbirth and all this just freaks me out a little bit. I want to still stick to the nutrition a little bit before we move on to the next thing. Is there any specific foods that are important after childbirth while breastfeeding? Because again, like you said, you could be eating protein, but your estrogen is so high. How does it work? What are the best things that people can do to heal themselves and also be able to build some sort of muscle in the process?
So the first thing is obviously making sure that you're eating enough micronutrients. That's very important. So like prioritizing your fruits, your vegetables, all those types of things in addition to your main macronutrients. The second thing that I would always advise people is to really focus on a high protein diet. And this is not just because of building muscle. Like even if you're not training, when you have a high protein diet, your milk quality just becomes really good. I know that people say, okay, we're going to, have lots of oats and chia seeds and flax seeds and all those types of things to boost milk quantity. Yes, that does make you have a lot of milk, but the really thick, satisfying milk for the baby comes when you have a high protein diet. It's like the equivalent of you feeding your baby a steak for dinner versus like wheat. You know what I mean? So you might have a lot of milk, but it could be very watery versus when you have a high protein diet, the baby will sleep better and they'll be more full from your milk. In addition to the fact that you're obviously going to be benefiting yourself because you need protein to recover. And also if you're strength training, you want to have a high protein diet as well. If you're somebody who's able to tolerate cow's milk, I would highly recommend drinking cow's milk or some form of cow's dairy because breastfeeding actually takes away from the calcium of the mother's bones to form the breast milk. And so your bones actually break down while you're breastfeeding, but then they actually will rebuild themselves. So if you have a lot of cow's milk dairy, you'll be able to have a stronger bone base, for example, than somebody who drinks, for example, plant milk. So if you're able to tolerate cow's milk dairy, I highly recommend that as a source of protein, whether it be through like yogurt or cottage cheese or, whatever it is that you prefer. But that's usually what I recommend to people. And then also taking, like if you enjoy lactation snacks and that type of thing, I would also recommend that to people because it does help with the amount of milliliters of milk that you produce. But like I said, again, the quality of milk really depends on how much protein you're taking in.
What about whey protein?
So something that you need to keep in mind is that baby's number one allergy is a cow's milk protein allergy. So that's something I also didn't mention. So it can cause stomach upset in some babies. Other babies are totally fine. Whey protein is obviously very concentrated, form of cow's milk. Especially if you're taking like, a scoop a day or even more than that. So if your baby's fussy, could be that you need to eliminate that, but some babies tolerate it totally fine. Like my son was totally fine with the whey protein, so I, continue to have my whey protein. But the other thing that you want to keep in mind is if you can try and find a source that's like as pure as possible without all the additives, that's better for you and for the baby as well. So not to get things that are like cookie dough flavored with like tons of sweeteners and that type of thing, like sticking to, there are a lot of pure whey protein powders that maybe have like 1 or 2 ingredients extra. That's better than like a list of 20 ingredients that you can't even pronounce.
And it's something worth a try. I asked you this because I have a few clients in India, and there, even like the doctors, the nutritionists, the trainers, they're still very backwards with their mentality. Like for example, even like one of my clients there told me like some trainer came up to her at a gym and said, "You're a girl, you shouldn't be drinking a protein shake," for example. So could you imagine like women who've just given birth? So one of my clients actually recently, she was like, "I can't have the protein powder. My doctor told me that it's really dangerous for the baby." And I was like, it's not dangerous, you know? And as you said, you test it out and you see, how do you react? How does your baby react to it? But you're not putting your baby in danger by giving it a shot, which is why I wanted to ask about whey protein.
Exactly. Yeah. So like I said, it could be that some of the other chemicals they add to protein powders may be dangerous. So it's better to stick to more natural types of whey protein. But if your baby tolerates it, like there are babies that get sensitivity from like potatoes. My children were both sensitive to fish and shrimps, which are extremely healthy, but they just they didn't tolerate it. Their stomachs couldn't tolerate it. So every baby is different. So it's all like a matter of trying it. And if it doesn't work, then you can eliminate that from your diet. But I would definitely not say it's extremely dangerous to have whey protein.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think like I said, I think everybody is so unique. Every baby is also going to be unique. We grew up, I probably don't have the same allergies as you. So it's the exact same case with the babies. So one baby may react a certain way while others just won't.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay. I want to shift into a little bit of the psychological part, since you are a psychiatrist. I thought let's jump into this a little bit. I want to talk about postpartum depression and anxiety. And I think a lot of people, especially in our cultures, do not tend to talk about this. It's something people just don't talk about.
A lot of women do go through postpartum anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders that happen. Again, mental health is very closely linked with hormones. And so common times that people tend to present with mental health issues in their lives are like surrounding the start of the period, the week leading up to the period, the pregnancy and postpartum time, and then also the premenopausal time. And the reason for that is because of all the hormonal shifts that are happening. Obviously, there are so many things that go into play in terms of if someone's going to develop it or not. Like things that you can't change, like your genetics, your family history, your personal history of any mental health issues are all going to play a role. But at the same time, what you can do is that you can try to take control of what you can control in terms of minimizing your risk of developing these mental health disorders postpartum. So things like making sure that you have support. Support plays a really big role. And if somebody's going to experience this or not, getting enough sleep plays a big role. And then also, obviously, exercise and movement is protective against postpartum depression. And so if you can stay moving, and I'm not saying that that has to be like a workout, but even just going for a walk, your risk of developing this will be significantly less if you are active. And so it's important to try and take control of what you can control. And then obviously also learning when to ask for help and seek help with a mental health professional is very important as well. And not to just kind of take on this burden of just dealing with it on your own. And a lot of women are really ashamed because sometimes when people have postpartum depression, a part of that is like wishing that the baby didn't exist, wishing that the baby was dead, thoughts of harming the baby. And so it can be really difficult for someone to admit to someone that they're feeling like that. Like, can you imagine telling your spouse or your mother-in-law, I'm thinking of killing the baby? Like, no one's going to open up about that, So you shouldn't just keep it in. You should go to someone that's a trusted mental health professional and tell them that you're having these types of thoughts, rather than just keeping it all in and then potentially risking something happening.
Yeah, I feel this. I just feel people don't tend to talk about this, and another reason I think they don't tend to talk about it as well is because they say, I'm a mom, I shouldn't have these thoughts. This is my baby. I should not feel like this. I wanted this. Oh, have I made a mistake? And it just goes into the circle. But yeah, I think seeking help is super important, and I think therapy needs to become something that women just do after pregnancy. This is what I believe, because I've worked with a lot of women who've given birth, and I don't know if maybe because I'm not from there, people tend to talk to me a lot more and open up a bit more. And I feel like this is something that should be provided post delivery, just by default.
That's actually an amazing suggestion. I never thought of that before, but I do agree with you. I think pelvic floor physiotherapy and mental health support should be mandatory postpartum, honestly.
Definitely.
People focus on the wrong things, like people in Kuwait focus on like eating random herbs and stuff like that, but then they like just disregard everything else, So it's like, just like you put importance on these things, you should also put importance on what's actually going to help improve your quality of life based on research.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even like you said, like the pelvic floor, the whole pelvic floor exercises should be incorporated, because a lot of the times also you've got women who've given birth, they don't have help at home, right? And it's really hard. Like, it's very, very hard for them to even start anything. I mean, maybe they can go for a walk or something. They can't, let's say they can't afford to go to a physio, to go to a trainer. They don't have a time. They don't have the time. They don't have a nanny. Their spouse is working. If this was provided, like, you have to go and sort out your pelvic floor before anything else, it would be such a big help, because then these women, by the time the kids are at an age where they finally feel like, they've got a hold of the routine and now they can work on themselves, so much damage has been done, which could have been fixed earlier. And I think that takes longer, right? The longer you wait.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that when women deliver a baby, the focus is all on the baby and there's no focus on the mother at all. So, like, for example, in Canada, it's mandatory to take your baby to see the doctor at the first 5 days after birth. And then you have to take them for a 1-month checkup, a 2-month checkup. The baby is constantly being checked on and taken care of, but the mother is just like, like in Canada, they don't even have a 40-day like stay at home period. They're just kind of expected to just go back into everything. And so if we were to say it's mandatory for you to go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, just like it's mandatory for you to take your baby to get checked on, you need to check on yourself too. Then people would take priority and actually think that this is something they need to be doing. But if it's just kind of like, if you want to, you can go see someone for therapy. If you want to
start a movement.
Exactly.
Let's start a movement.
Honestly, like, because women, on top of the whole identity shift that they go through after having children and like how much their life changes. And honestly, I'm somebody who, I was never an aunt. I never was involved in helping raise young children or my cousins or anything like that. I didn't realize how much your life changes. Maybe because you're an aunt, you kind of have an idea of like, how much children change your life. But I had no idea. I just thought, okay, I'm pregnant. It's all cute.
Can have baby
bump photos. And then I remember as soon as I had my daughter, they handed her to me. And I was like, oh shit. Like, this is a real child. What am I supposed to do now?
I'm responsible for this thing.
Like now what? Like, what am I supposed to do? And then with breastfeeding, you have to have your whole life schedule revolving around the baby and when the baby's going to feed. And so you can't go to the gym whenever you want. You can't go out whenever you want. Like, you can't sleep whenever you want. And so many things change in your life. And I think that identity shift in itself causes so many mental health struggles for people. Throwing in hormones, throwing in lack of sleep, throwing in lack of movement, throwing in poor nutrition. Like, it's just like a dumpster fire for some people. And so making it mandatory to get people checked out is something I think that everyone should do. I wish things were like that.
Would be cool. Who knows? Maybe somebody will hear this, or maybe somebody will come up with the same idea if they have a conversation about it. And it's definitely important. So you just said like you didn't know what to do, right, when this baby was handed to you. And yes, I'm an aunt, and in our culture, when after the girl gives birth, she comes and stays with her mom, and the mom helps out. So we can kind of help her go through the whole process, and she doesn't go into any mental health issues or anything. And I was with my niece because she was born in Kuwait. When my sister was staying there for 40 days, we had like a full schedule of when my sister would have the baby, because the baby wouldn't sleep. She would be up all night. Then at like 5 a.m., I would wake up. I would go take the baby. I'm under baby duty for like 4 hours. And then we would we had this whole routine planned out for 40 days. Yeah. So in your case, you hadn't experienced anything in terms of babies, like you just said. So how did you manage to kind of juggle everything? Because again, this comes down to, for me, I was just there 40 days. My routine just changed for 40 days of my life. Your routine probably has changed for so long, and now you just had a second baby and it's still changing, right? So how do you balance all this, and how do you recommend people balance all this? Let's start with your story.
Well, the first thing that I did was it honestly wasn't easy at all. I was crying a lot. I was in shock for a long time because it was just like a realization that my life would never be the same. And after it kind of was all over, it happened again, because even having a second baby, also like you have a routine, and then when you have the second baby, the routine is all like ruined, and then you need to establish a new routine. So it's just kind of more about like the realization that, you're not going to be able to do everything, and you need to prioritize your child now. Because obviously, you know how they say like, oh, prioritize fitness, but then some people don't really prioritize fitness, and it's like, whatever. You can't not prioritize your children, especially when they're in
Yeah.
infancy. So you have to prioritize your children. And if that means that like, you can't go out as much, you can't see your friends as much, it's just something, conversations that you have to have with people. Like my friends who didn't have children at the time didn't really know what I was going through, but they were supportive enough to like come visit me at home instead of me going out to like fancy dinners and that type of thing. So making sure that you have a good, you know, like source of support, whether it be from your family or your friends as well. And honestly, for me now, if I'm able to just wake up in the morning, go to the gym, then I'm good. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to watch Netflix. I don't need to go out. I don't need to go to avenues. I don't go shopping anymore. Like it's all online. So honestly, my life has changed a lot, and it's not like in a good way or a bad way. It's just a different chapter of your life, and every single person is going to go through different chapters of their life, whether or not they have children. But it, of course, like they become your priority. And when they grow older, their social life becomes your social life. So you're going to have to take them to birthdays. You're going to have to take them to different, pick them up from school, take them home from school. So a huge chunk of your day is occupied with them. And so it's just like, that just becomes the new you.
Yeah. I mean,
Just,
my sister lost some friends actually after her kid, which I thought was really messed up. That was like, they're not very good friends. Like, they just
yeah.
stopped inviting her because she was a mom. She was busy with, play dates and this and that. And then they just like shut her out. Like, oh, we're living different lives now. And it's like, that's kind of mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think if
Yeah,
you're a good friend, you should always hold space for your friend, whether that means that you
for
understand
sure.
what they're going through or not. Like, I have
Yeah.
friends that are in all different stages of their lives. Just because they could say the same thing, they could be like, "Oh, I don't have kids. I have no idea what you're going through. I'm just gonna shut you out." And I could be like, "Oh, you're single and traveling, and your problems are not significant to me." But as a friend, you should always hold space for your friends, even if you're in different
Yeah.
chapters of each other's lives, and support each other. But unfortunately, in
Cut those
life,
people out.
yeah, in life, you're gonna be surprised by some people. So in a way, it's good because then you realize who's actually there for you and who isn't.
That is true. But in terms of the whole balancing thing, when you're back in Canada, obviously things are different. Now you're in Kuwait, you're with your family, you have more support, and you got your friends. Um, you're not working at a hospital in Kuwait, right? Just
No.
in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take you to Canada. How do you balance all of this? So you're a fitness trainer, you are a doctor, and you are a mom of kids both under two, right?
Yeah. 2.5 now.
Yeah.
I
Two and a half. I
graduated.
mean, still really young, but how do you manage that while you're over there?
So the interesting thing about Canada is we don't really have social lives there. And you'd be surprised how much Kuwaiti social life takes up time in your day. And so, yes,
Really?
obviously, like work keeps me busy, and I do have to work for very long periods of because our work is from 8 to 5 there, but the rest of the day is mine. You know, in Kuwait, you
That's
work, but
good.
then you have to go to this person's wedding and this person's birth reception and this person's funeral and this person's birthday and this person's dinner. And then your whole week is full of stuff. And then you're just like, you have no time for yourself, you know? So I
Yeah.
actually think, in a way, I have a lot of free time in Canada. And then the programming, I always, because it's not my main career, I do know how to take time off of that if I need to. And I do limit myself in how much programming I do if I feel like I'm overwhelmed. So obviously, it's always
Yeah.
important to prioritize, like, even if that is your main source of income, like prioritizing your mental health and your life is the most important thing. And then money will always come later on, but you need to do what you
True.
need to do sometimes.
That is true. Yeah, actually, I agree with you. I feel like when I'm here, I feel a lot more chilled and I have so much more time to do my stuff when I'm in Kuwait. I mean, I'm social here, but not as much as in Kuwait. Kuwait, it just becomes obligations more than
Yeah.
anything else. And it's just that when I come here, I'm like, I can relax
Yeah.
and, socialize on my part. So yeah, that I feel that. But that's really good.
Okay. My take home message is, number one, don't be afraid of having kids, because I feel like there's some scary stuff that were said, but it's honestly a beautiful experience if you choose to go through it. It is very gratifying. Number two is to give yourself grace. And number three is not to compare yourself to other people. And that goes, for whether you've delivered or not. I feel like social media has just become so overwhelming. And at the same time, you need to recognize people only show you like 1% of their day. Even me,
Mhm.
for example, even if I posted like 10 stories, that's still like 1 hour of my day. You don't see what's going on in the other 23 hours of my day. So never compare yourself to people on social media, and recognize that your journey through pregnancy and postpartum is going to be different than everyone else's. And so just to keep your focus, keep taking care of your body, keep eating well, keep moving, and everything will work itself out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And I also want to leave one take home, which is if you have just given birth, make sure to go see a physio for your pelvic floor. Get that done. Like, don't wait. Let that be the first thing that you do. I mean, I don't have experience with it, but Hannah's told you all the scary things. So make sure you get that done. Awesome, Hannah.
Go see a therapist or a psychiatrist.
Yes, that's another. I think that's even more important. Awesome. Well, thank you, Hannah, for being on the show.
Thank you so much. And like, amazing job with the podcast. Keep the conversations going. The more people talk about this, the more that people are going to open their eyes to things they never even knew. So I'm really grateful you asked me to join the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you guys for listening to It's Pretty Simple. If you like this episode, please make sure to hit like and share it with a friend who's pregnant, who's breastfeeding, who's in postpartum. Hopefully, they can take something away from this. And if you are not following the show, please make sure to hit subscribe or follow on whichever platform that you are listening to. I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much.